Together we built Podcastic, a full-stack podcast discovery and listening application. In my section, I'll walk through the main user features I worked on, including trending, search, authentication, and personal collections, and then give a code overview of how these features were implemented on both the front end and back end. After my part, I'll hand it over to Kerri, who will walk through our audio player, queue system, and our theme features. First, I'm going to show a list of our requirements and some enhancements. For Podcastic, our core requirement was a home view, a light dark mode, a discover or search feature, podcast detail, an audio player, personal collection, and then a core requirement was a database. And then for our enhancements, we had accounts you're adding to the database, and another enhancement was advanced player controls. Now I'm going to switch over to our actual application, Podcastic. So here we have Podcastic. Listen smarter. It starts with our nav bar, which has a home page, our trending podcast, library, favorites, playlists, our search bar, log in and register. Let's go ahead and register a user. And our user has been successfully registered. Now we'll log him in. So when we registered our user, we use full user authentication. Users can register. We can store their account securely in our MongoDB database. When they log in, the backend returns a JWT token, which the front end stores in a global state. This allows us to save their library, favorites, and queue directly to their user account instead of temporary browser storage. Now let's look at our home view trending. So this shows different podcasts. When users open Podcastic, they land on the trending page. This page displays live trending podcasts pulled from the PodcasIndex API. The front end calls our backend endpoint API podcast trending. The backend fetches and formats the data, and we map the results into a clean grid layout in which you see here. This gives the users a great starting point for exploring new shows. Now, users can add or remove from their personal library. From the trending list or any podcast page, users can add or remove podcasts from their library. If the user isn't logged in, the library is saved locally using browser local storage, so their changes persist even if they refresh the page. If the user is logged in, as we are here, we sync the library to their account in our MongoDB database. This means their library follows them across devices. So our new user, we're going to save the Hammercast, Stat Stacker Show, and this one looks cool to save. We'll save that. Go to our library, and we see that we have some here already. And we can also remove them from the list. Let's talk about the podcast detail view. So in our trending podcast, we can click View Details. And this will give the image of the podcast, the description. We can visit the website. Now it lists each of our podcast episodes. The data also comes from our backend, which handles calling PodcastIndex and returning a clean, normalized structure. The front end can easily render. Up here, we have our search bar. Users can search for podcast titles or specific episodes. As the user types, we send the search term to the backend, which returns matching results in a consistent format. Results update instantly, allowing users to jump straight into the content they're looking for. Let's search for cats. Anything that has cat in it, Cat 81 radio, Cats music, Warrior Cats. A user can also save their collections. A collection is their library, and we showed that earlier. Here's our library. Let's save these. You can see that it has added to the user's library. Now I'm going to switch to VS Code, and we'll do a code overview, a walkthrough of our code. It should be the right one. Also, lastly, I want to show that we actually cut that part out. Also, here's our render connected to our hosting site. So this allows us to not develop locally, but we can actually store it to a hosting service and have our Podcastic available to anybody. Now I'll do a code walkthrough. But just to kind of give our backend architecture overview and how the backend is organized, we use a clean separation of routes, controllers, and models for our backend. Here, server TS wires everything together. Each feature, podcast collection, and authentication has its own route file right here. The user model defines what we store in MongoDB, including email, hashed passwords, and the user's library, favorites, and queue. It's showing here. Let's talk about trending, search, and podcast details. Let's open our backend controller's podcast controller. This controller handles trending podcasts, search, and details. We talk to the PodcastIndex API using a helper function that creates the required timestamp and SHA-1 signature. This keeps our controller clean and focused. We also normalize the API data so the front end always receives constant objects. Now we'll talk about authentication logic. Let's go to the auth controller. In the auth controller, we securely hash passwords during registration and verify them during login. When login succeeds, we generate a JWT token, which the front end stores so users can access protected routes and save their collection to the database. The user collection logic is here in the collections controller. Here's where we update the user collections. When users add something to their library or favorites, we update only the specific fields in MongoDB. The controller returns the updated user, which keeps the front end state in sync. The front end state, let's talk about front end state and local storage. We find that in our use auth store TS. On the front end, we use zstan for global state. This lets the UI update instantly whenever the user adds or removes something. For logged out users, we save collections to local storage using small helper and utility storage TS. Which is our file here, the JSON helpers. When the app loads, zstan reads local storage first, so users always see their saved items. even without logging in. That covers the features I worked on and the backend and front-end logic behind them. Now I'll turn it over to Kerri, who will walk through our audio player, episode playback, and queue system and theme features. Kerri, I turn it over to you.
Okay. We have our front end hosted on Vercel. The back end is on Render, and the database is on MongoDB. So the first thing I wanted to show was the light and dark mode. If I go to our index.css, you can see that with Tailwind, we're using, I decided to use this new cool thing that it does with the theme so that it changes for the preferred color scheme for the user, and it goes from light and dark mode. So if you can see here, let's see, Control P, render. Sorry, that wasn't ready. I can look at, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay, go to light and dark mode, depending upon the user's theme. So then I want to log in. So it shows the auth token and the auth user. Let's see. We have the library. I want to view the details, and I want to add to the queue. Notice it automatically starts playing or pausing. You see that it synchronizes. If I move it, automatically goes to the next episode. It can move to the next episode as well, or can go back. So you notice the pause. It also, I added those to the playlist. The queue is actually not synchronized with it, but the favorites are with localhost. So localhost shows the favorites just added. Those I'm not clicking the right one. 3. Okay, so if I were to go to the database, I would see the favorites array, the queue. That's where the queue, it has the episodes as well, and they are stored in the library. That's where the objects are for all of what we need saved and what's been added or taken away. So there's the favorites. It also takes them away from storage. So if I were to go and take all these away, then I could go to MongoDB and I could show you that the favorites is empty and the queue is empty. So it is updated with that. If I were to log out, I could then have add these to the queue, and then they will show up in local storage. So there's my queue episodes here because I'm not logged in. So I showed that it can go skip forwards and backwards. I can move the slider on the play and it can start at that point. Go to the next and previous episodes and it will go automatically to the next in queue. So in the code structure, we heavily use the Zoostand player store to keep track of the state for whether or not an episode is playing. It keeps track of the looks in the object, the library, which has the actual details from the API that we brought in. It has a queue that holds the ID so that it pulls from the library. But by keeping the state in the store, Then the player can access whether or not the episode's playing. The queue view can access that, as well as the favorites view. All of those have a play button. And so that synchronizes with that. And if you are logged in, it checks that when you first come in. And then depending upon that, with this hydrate player, it will either, if you are logged in, it will take the information for the queue, the favorites, and the library from the database. If not, it will come from like local storage, and it will synchronize that way. And what else do I have open? The player is, it watches, it keeps track of the state. This is where we keep track of the state, the player. It updates the time and duration, so you know where you're at. And so each play button, no matter what page it's on, has access to that state. And then it listens to that, goes forward, backwards, it seeks, and it shows the time and duration of the queue. That's where it also accesses, and it handles the click for the button, or it removes or adds to based on the toggle. But it has the play button that synchronizes with the store. And that, I believe, is what I have done. So I think I'm done.
All right, thanks, Kerri. That'll wrap up Podcastic for our senior project. Thanks for listening.